Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Cal Rev's The Chest of the Best. The adventurer's best friend, where you can get everything you want for just your top half off. And tonight, we are talking shop. This time, as you may have guessed it, episode 8 of the Magnus Archives. This time, okay. So, episode 8 feels a little bit of a wild card when compared to, I guess, every episode leading up to this, which can sound a bit surprising when compared to episode 7 last time, which was just an overwhelming deluge of artifacts being dumped into a very important place lore-wise in the world of Magnus Archives, and yet here we are with some more details, more hints as to what could possibly be going on in the world of TMP. And just another deluge of questions as to what the heck is being set up here. What nonsense is going on in the background and all that wonderful things that make the Magnus Archives and, of course, the Magnus Protocol so compelling. But with that being said, perhaps it would be best if we just go ahead and skip the preamble and just get straight to it. And in fact, that is exactly what happens in episode 8. Rather than give us a glimpse as to what's going on in the office, it actually starts immediately with the incident in question, filed under Category 2 RBC 3366 1207 2023 2802 2024. That is to say, it appears that the event in question occurs on July 12th, 2023, and of course this is being filed on February 28th, 2024. Quite interesting, I suppose, in the sense that this occurs how many days prior to the last one? Well, I guess that's not exactly interesting. Oh, this happens at least 2 weeks. Or at least... Wait, 2 weeks? Hang on. I think my math is wrong here. Sorry, about a little over a week. The last incident filed was February 12th, 2024. So this takes place a week and some change afterwards. And this is quite the incident indeed. It's marked as being related, subcategorized under architecture, liminal spaces, with cross-references towards hunger and coursework. In this case, that is in reference to the episode itself. The incident appears to be an academic paper, of all things. This one being dictated by Norris, aka Martin, aka most likely Martin. And it is graded coursework, an assessment report by one Joseph Peterson, who apparently wrote a personal case study of, quote, architecturally induced psychological stressors as a result of prolonged exposure to liminal spaces in the brutalist mode at a place known as Fortin Service Station, with a thesis apparently on how service stations can be psychologically stressful as a result of liminal space and brutalist architecture, using his own experience as reference and evidence for his thesis. Don't worry, I will explain the definitions, and the paper would go on to describe the... Well, it's an academic paper. You know how it's written. So he goes on to define what it is. In this case, for those of you who don't know, it's okay, I didn't know either. Brutalism apparently is categorized as a utilitarian architectural movement. This involves things like exposed materials, repetitive shapes, and monolithic structures. So in other words, think of whenever you see a dam, for example, and you can actually see like the concrete structures that are holding it up. You know, from like the outside, it seems like the concrete is just going along with the shape of it. As opposed to if you were to see it in like video games, it appears to be very intricate. Perhaps you can make the argument that the Eiffel Tower is an example of brutalist architecture. And they say that in regards to, in the paper, possibly when I was looking this up, I don't recall, unfortunately, but the effect of brutalism architecture apparently can lead to feelings of being overwhelmed or oppressed, or so Peterson claims in his paper. And then liminal spaces is in regards to transitional spaces, normally inhabited for short periods, with the exposure eliciting anxiety and uncanniness. Think of, for example, a playground, but there are no children on playing. Think of a school that you are familiar with as being bustling and full of activity, but is now empty, right? This is a liminal space. It's like looking at a space that is usually bustling and busy and seeing it as eerily empty. So Peterson apparently uses his experience at Fortin Services as an inspiration or evidence demonstrating that a combination of both brutalism and liminal spaces results in a psychological effect that appears to have affected him so greatly that it would cause him to write a paper, despite the fact that apparently the paper is not good enough and he actually gets a failing grade. I'm sorry, it's rough out there, I know. So apparently, Peterson claims that Fortin Services has elements of both that intersect and created a pronounced effect over his psyche after working there for a prolonged period of time. And he goes on to call this effect an architectural hunger, a sense of absence despite presence. In other words, the mixture of the brutalism architecture, which creates a feeling of being overwhelmed or oppressed, contrasts, but is, I guess, complemented by the anxiety and uncanniness of liminal spaces, thereby creating this sense that there is something there, but you don't actually see it. That's not good, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Apparently, Fortin was once a space in and of itself and became liminal due to modernization of transportation. Think of any sort of like truck stop, I guess. Just like over long periods, over long stretches of road, you'd find like some place that seems to be a bustling little section in the middle of nowhere. That is what Fortin Service Station is, apparently. And apparently, the result of it existing in that space caused it to thrive during periods of time when modern transportation was not an option. As a result, these service stations apparently were tourist destinations in and of themselves, but they would have like elements to them that would make it feel like they create a time distortion, such as an absence of clocks to encourage stays plus 24-hour opening times. Because of that, Peterson claims that the stations are thus, quote, dislocated from humanity's shared mindscape, end quote, and therefore makes them dangerous. You see the setup, obviously. You see the setup coming up fairly quickly, but it's only after his little introduction paragraph that he finally gets into the meat of the incident. Originally, he took on a role as a night janitor at Fortin after a divorce that cost him most of his friendships. He ended up quitting his job as a deputy fiduciary services administrator, I've never heard that word pronounced, and applied as well to the architectural program at Lancashire. I'm American, you'll have to forgive me. But he applied for the architecture program at a local university, where he was the oldest person there, surrounded by people far younger than him. He doesn't mention it, but he makes a point of mentioning his age for some reason. He realized that the service station was an example of brutal liminalism, and attributes that in part to a 20-meter tower that served as a tourist point of the area. That was closed to the public by the time he was working there. The area itself was large, about 17.7 acres on both sides of the motorway, with picnic sites and a seating for 700 people and 403 parking spaces. The top of the tower apparently had a fine dining restaurant with a roof-level sun terrace. Apparently, however, the brutal liminality took effect and the tower and restaurant were closed in 1989 due to the, quote, soulless nature of the area, the tower itself eventually becoming closed completely. Peterson would then go on to notice that there was a psychological shift after working there for several months, and he found that after weeks and weeks of working there, less and less people were there every night, till one night he realized he hadn't seen a single person at all. He looked outside to see if there were any cars, but found nothing, and instead, he saw streaks of light in the air with some bizarre, muted haze hanging over the expanse, speckled with randomly vivid colors that was only ever on the asphalt and not on the walkways or greenery. For some reason, he notes it as being familiar and is unable to tell if the effect was psychological, physiological, or atmospheric, but notes that there was a sense of absence and hunger. When he traced the lights with his eyes leading to the main doors for the facilities of the service station, he recalled his ex-wife's photography that he'd received a gift in the form of a time-lapse photo. He's reasons that maybe there was the long-term exposure to the area was causing hallucinations, but despite that, the mist seemed to move into the building and he felt an instinctual need to hide. And in running away from the mist, he fled towards the tower where there was a young woman, tall, thin to the point of malnourishment, holding the door open to the elevator and inviting him in. He, terrified, leaps at the opportunity without questioning it, goes into the elevator, and the woman simply hits the button that shouldn't be working, and it goes straight up to the restaurant. The only thing that he notes about her from that point on is just her appearance and the nameplate that she had. That simply reads, "You are here." She talks to him very warmly, expresses a very cheery demeanor when she insists that he stay a while. Eventually, the elevator makes its way to the top, the doors open, and despite the fact that there was supposed to be nothing but damp and broken furniture on the top floor, or at least that's what his predecessors, someone named Molly, showed him, the restaurant instead was immaculate. Pristine, he describes it, properly decorated, in 60s style, apparently, and there's the scent of food. The only thing that really stands out to him is the fact that the windows were blacked out, even though they were supposed to give a full panoramic view of the surrounding countryside. Not only that, there are other diners in the restaurant as well. Nearly all the seats were filled and occupied by these diners, except for one, which a chef cheerily beckons and motions for Peterson to take. All the while, the diners are chatting, as one does in a public space. However, while Peterson feels safe for a moment, he starts to realize that the diners weren't chatting. Well, they were, but they weren't saying anything meaningful. They were just making noises. It was like if someone was mimicking the sound of crowds in conversation. There was nothing really substantial behind what they were doing. They just sounded like people talking. And as he observed closer, he noticed that the diners were all kind of sort of palette swaps of each other. He noticed that there were repeating elements, the same clothes, the same facial features. He saw repeats of the same heels, the same hat, even the same mustache and other facial features. And all of them, the only thing constant about them at all was the fact that they were all very thin. The chef greets him as he approaches, tells him, "You are here," and it's also on his nameplate as well, and he insists that he stay a while. And as Peterson goes to sit down, he stops and notices that the other diners have started to lean towards him, as if they're waiting for something. Then he feels a breeze and he realizes that the windows aren't blacked out. They're opened into a gaping void. At this point, I guess finally his instincts and his ability to catch on that things aren't exactly right with the situation, he starts to retreat to the lift, but the diners have stopped chatting and have gone silent. They're all looking at him, smiling, and the chef again insists that he stay a while. But this time, it feels less like a warm insistence and more like an order. And then the diners start to echo those words. Stay a while. Stay a while. Stay a while. That's when they start to rush him. They push and pull him back to the table. One of them starts biting into his legs, and another starts on his shoulder. And yet another actually manages to bite off his finger. He fights back, but he realizes that the elevator has already disappeared. So he has two options at this point. Stay a while, or hurl himself out the window into the gaping void. And I guess the fear of the unknown isn't enough to scare this guy. And I guess the fear of the unknown is lesser when compared to the fear of being eaten. Because he does that. He hurls himself out the window, and ends up waking up basically on the grounds of the service station, rushed off to the hospital, where it's assumed that he just had a psychotic breakdown that resulted in him flinging himself out the window of the tower after working there for a prolonged period of time. Never mind the fact that he lost his fingers, but, no one seems willing to dispute that, including Peterson. And apparently it's for that very reason that his paper ends up being late. And he notes that no one seemed to have noticed that he was gone for a long time anyways. Thus, he concludes his experience as proof of hungry architecture. And thus, the incident ends. I think it would be best for us to go ahead and just try to break down what the heck happened in this one. What the heck happened in this one? It's quite a... First of all, we'll look at it in terms of just like what's there, right? And what we have here is an example of hostile architecture being covered yet again by the World of Magnus archives. Now, in the past, when it came to architecture, the name that would come up in this field of fearful study would always be Robert Smirk, who in real life was a renowned architect, but in the World of Magnus archives, he is a... How would you describe him? He's an architect, but he is I don't know, probably fancied himself something of a luminary, in the sense that he believed that using architecture, one could balance out the fears and prevent them from gaining a foothold in the world. I feel like there was an explanation as to why he thought architecture was the way to go about it, but I unfortunately could not remember that if that were the case. It may have appeared in whatever episode that he popped up in, but I'm not particularly convinced that I could find it within a short enough period of time. Now, he was never an architect of the fears themselves, but he was always using architecture to keep them in balance, and it's curious that architecture should also factor in this world as well. Although, perhaps it shouldn't be so surprising. There have been repeat elements after all. Despite the fact that all the avatars have been blending the fears, that doesn't change the fact that there have been avatars in the first place. It doesn't change the fact that artifacts are still a very prominent factor in their ability to act in the world or instill their fears in humans in the material world of the Magnus Protocol. Now, the question, I guess, here will be, is Smirk also a factor in this world as well? Like, does Smirk have the reputation that he had in the world of the Magnus Protocol as he did in Archives? Well, that's not something that we can really explore at this point until someone brings up architecture again. One has to wonder if he took on any students. And during his time, we know that at the very least, even in this world, the fears are that old. You know, we have the episode, what was it, episode 3, 4? Whichever one that Augustus appeared in with the violin. We know that at the very least they can date as far back as the 1800s, which would be around the time that Smirk was active as well. Meaning it's quite possible that he may have become an architect in pursuit of balancing out the fears and ensuring that they never gain a foothold or have a stronghold to act and enact their will upon the poor, hapless populace. And there is the possibility that he may have taken on his 3 students, yet 3? Well, at least 2. There's no guarantee that he didn't take on... There's possibility he took on at least 2 students again, who will go on to be one of the most fearsome avatars that the world had ever known. But as long as his name hasn't been mentioned, we'll never really get an answer to that. Who knows? Maybe Smirk did influence a certain curious and observation-oriented voyeur. But I don't know. It's just neat to see architecture factor in this sort of thing once again. But let's go ahead and skip and set that aside. Of all the possible hypotheses and trails of thought that we could explore, that probably is the lowest in terms of priority. Looking at the incident itself, the incident, is that what I said? Yes. Looking at the incident itself and wondering what entities could possibly be active in here. One is fairly obvious, and I think a lot of people would probably latch on to this aspect of it, which is, the lonely. The lonely, of course, in this situation is present in a myriad of ways, not least of which is the fact that Norris is dictating this incident yet again. Norris, of course, if you need a reminder, being Martin. So, hey, Martin, it's kind of interesting that you would be dictating one that seems to have elements of the lonely, and those elements, of course, being mist, isolation, time dilation aspects. Like, this is very on brand and in character for the lonely. Mist seems to appear in many situations. For example, a couple of the domains, there is a bit of a fog that occurs there. There was the Lucas's house when, I forget which episode it was, but when one of the Lucases died and their significant other went to the funeral and the wake, I guess, they found themselves being trapped in the lonely on their escape, with fog setting in and separating them from basically all of civilization. Time dilation also factors in a little bit as well, especially with regards to... Actually, I'm trying to remember. I had this. Well, in any case, the mist and isolation factors in as well. It also occurs with the boatswain's call. I just remembered. Got it. In other instances, the writer, Peterson, is quite... well, they're going through the ringer. They were divorced, lost the majority of their friendships, quit their old job, thereby losing any and all of their professional connections as well. Uh, and ended up going back to university at the ripe old age of 51 years old in a setting and community that, while not, while anyone of any age can go back to uni, there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. But typically, the college scene seems to be dominated by those fresh out of high school or thereabouts. So, you know, Peterson is unfortunately surrounded, or rather, not surrounded by people. Not only is he cut off from, I guess, the love of his life, cut off from all of his social connections, all of his business connections, and he is now surrounded by people that simply can't relate to him as well. So he gets the double whammy of losing everyone that he could possibly care about, any kind of social circle that he could be a part of, and a and yet has a bunch of people that could make him feel even more alone. It's hard to look at it and be like, okay, yeah, no. His loneliness is most certainly not the thing that's being preyed upon. Absolutely, for sure. And let's not forget the fact that it probably got exacerbated by the fact that, in the end, no one seemed to really notice when he was gone. The aspects of the lonely are so strong just in Peterson himself that you could very easily just slap lonely onto it and call it a day. But let's dig a little deeper. So, looking at the other aspects, specifically the restaurant itself, where all the diners are and all of them just kind of sort of exist in this space, minding their own business, pretending to be human while only really having the semblance of it and not the substance. This actually ties in pretty well with Magnus Archives episode 48, Lost in the Crowd. In that episode, a traveler explores Genoa, Italy, wherein they are stared at by a pale, scrawny man with long black hair. This person being Gerard Key. Gerard Key being I guess you could say underling, right, of Gertrude Robinson, and Jerry warns her to remember the ones that she loves, which is a common tactic in order to basically, I guess, escape the fears whenever you're trapped in their domain or in their possession, if you will, but especially with regards to the lonely. Now, while she is exploring, the traveler ends up going to an old part of Genoa, isolated from the rest. They were led to believe that it would lead to a street market that was full of people, and when they find it, they find that the crowd of people is so thick it's hard to move. And then, quite similarly, they find that the crowd isn't speaking a language. They're just making noise. It just sounds like a crowd. Quite similar to the diners in this incident, in this episode. Of course, there is some differences. The faces here are literally a blur. There are no distinguishing marks, and the clothes were different versions of the same thing. Much more distinctly a palette swap of each other, rather than customized palette swaps. However, there's also the case that in this instance, there was also no antagonism. The crowd didn't seem to really grab the traveler as she tried to move through the crowd, or pull her apart, or eat her, which we will get back to. They were just a crowd that existed and served to, I guess, crush her with the sheer weight of no one actually being there for her, you could say. Thankfully, the traveler was able to think about her mother and eventually loses. She escapes, essentially, and ends up waking or coming to in the middle of an empty street being stared at by passerbys, wondering what the heck she's doing. Or maybe it seems to them that she came out of nowhere. It's largely believed that this episode was an instance of the lonely at work, and you could most certainly make that what's the word? Presumption? No, assumption. Presumption. You could either way, you could make the argument that it is, and there are strong elements to suggest that that is the case. One of the aspects of the lonely is not just being by yourself, it's also to be surrounded by people that you can't connect to. Both are very legitimate manifestations of the lonely. But the flesh doesn't typically factor in. For those of you who may not recall the flesh being the fear of being eaten, that is not something that is typically mixed with the lonely. It is not something that has particularly occurred. I guess you could make the argument that since everyone ends up being alone when they get attacked, it's never really a group occurrence to be attacked by the entities unless we're talking rituals, but typically it's a specific fear that is being feasted upon rather than a combination of the flesh and the lonely. However, that's not what happens in this episode of Protocol. What happens in this protocol is the crowd ends up eating into Peterson. So I guess you could say that this is a rather, I don't know, ham-fisted blurring of the fears, a none too subtle combination of the lonely and the flesh, which can seem disjointed a little bit. However, there is a connecting thread which can easily put them together, and which would also make this incident quite interesting to be dictated by Martin of all people. And that is the aspect of the, 13th? Doesn't matter. There could be any number of entities at this point in time, we don't know, but it's the extinction. I haven't talked much about the extinction at this point in time, and it's mostly because there was very little reason to even broach the topic, but the extinction was the fear of, I guess, apocalypse is the easiest way to look at it, or the world after the apocalypse. The idea of the world and society collapsing to be replaced by something else. Thought to be an emerging fear in the world of archives. Here, it's once again on display. You can find the parallel elements in the diners and their ravenous appetite. Sure, it could be an aspect of the flesh, right? But this isn't the first time that bizarre, gaunt, vaguely human creatures, but not quite strangers, are acting in a way similar to humans, but in a way that is hostile towards them at the same time. And that's Magnus Archives episode 156, Reflection. In this episode, a once popular amusement park is reduced to, wouldn't you believe it, a liminal space, where a man planned to use it as a party site. Whereupon, while exploring a mirror, a hall of mirrors, finds a warped mirror that made him thin and gaunt. He doesn't remember what happens next, but he wakes up in the amusement park while it is active, and there are people going around and enjoying the games, the rides, the food as well. Except these people, you guessed it, aren't people. While they were wearing the same clothes, they were gaunt, with sunken eyes, thin hair, and a ravenous appetite. Not just ravenous, by the way, but cannibalistic as well. In fact, an accident that occurs, which causes someone to fall off a roller coaster and die on the ground below them, leads to the entire park closing in on their corpse to feast on it. At which point, the man that experiences this ends up trying to escape, but catching the attention of the rest of the park, eventually fleeing through the mirror that pulled him in the first place. Once again, there was a lot there. Just a lot of parallels to be had. And it was believed at the time that that statement was taken and reflected upon that this was an example of the extinction. Sure, certainly, there were aspects of other fears present, such as the flesh, the stranger. I think there were a number of other suspected entities in that case, but it was believed that this was a very distinct fear indeed. And you can see that being present here in this incident, wherein, yes, the diners are there. Yes, they are keen on eating Peterson alive, but it's noted that they have a malnourished appearance to them, quite similarly to the people in Archives episode 156. Now, the behaviors are a little different. The ones that were in Archives, they just ate bone, right? And they would suck out the marrow. Whereas here, it seems that they are relatively civilized up until he tries to escape. At which point they go absolutely feral. But it doesn't change the fact that this is our through line that connects our lonely aspect to the flesh aspect of this as well. And once again, it should be interesting that Martin should be the one dictating this specific incident, because in Archives, Martin was taking on the duty of trying to pin down whether or not the extinction was emerging as a distinct entity or not. While the others were hyper-focused on, well, whatever, just keep staying alive and staying ahead of the curve of all the other rituals, Martin was taking on the duty of looking into the extinction and preventing it from enacting its will on the world, because it was believed that if the extinction, the fear of the human society being wiped out completely and so thoroughly, then it would be absolutely catastrophic if it were to even attempt to do a ritual in the first place. Once again, quite an interesting connection, and one that could further support the idea that there is, in fact, a pattern behind which statements get dictated by who. There are perhaps other arguments that could be made to say that other entities are involved in this space as well. The vast being a very obvious choice, I suppose, in the sense that the lonely and the vast always get along in this regard. Regardless, though, there's not much else to be drawn from this incident in particular. Although I suppose we could try to bear in mind or recall the name Fortin Service Station. It's not like every location in Archives would be like explored. Not every named location was going to be revisited by the cast, even if it appeared in statements. However, if it's named, we might as well keep it in mind, right? Especially considering the fact that something so sinister and crazy and wild and, well, capital W weird should have happened there. We have to be mindful of the fact that a marked location, right, might serve a part in the grander scheme of things, considering the fact that Hilltop Road has been mentioned already. Needles has already mentioned the importance, well, has reflected on how his stomping grounds has been marked by whatever fear that he serves, which, if I recall correctly, we chalked it up to the desolation or slaughter, perhaps. Or the end. One of many, right? So we'll have to just keep in our back pocket Fortin Service Station. But at the very least, I guess, I don't know if it's reassuring or not, but at least we know the extinction has a more pronounced sense of participation in the workings of the world at large. Whether or not that is going to be a horrific bring about a horrific result, we'll see. We'll see. Hopefully it doesn't star too much in this series in particular, if only because while it was only briefly and lightly explored in the final 2 seasons of Archives, its instances, while relatively tame, were still very... There was a level of activity to it that could be cause for concern. So for now, we'll just go ahead and keep that in our back pocket. And now from here on, let's go ahead and jump into the rest of the episode, which is a return to the OIAR. Except, not just the OIAR. We'll get to that in a second. But after the incident ends, we get back to the OIAR, where Gwen and Alice are doing their barbed workplace back and forth as always. Gwen reveals that even at this point, despite the fact that she has gotten her so-called promotion as externals liaison from Lena, the paperwork hasn't gone through yet. She hasn't gotten a proper onboarding for her work duties, and she still doesn't exactly know what it means. Although she imagines that she is going to be managing a bunch of contractors. I guess we can expect to hear from Starkwell soon now, won't we? But that doesn't come up again this episode, so set that aside for now. Alice expresses some dislike of all the changes lately. Colin, after literally getting into a fight with Sam, has been put appropriately on mental health leave. Apparently he smashed up Sam's phone, so yeah, property damage, although dude's been doing a bunch of damage to the office anyways by ripping out all the wires and stuff. So I mean, I guess if it's the underfunded department's property, then it's fine. Private property, not so much, especially since whoever's watching needs Sam's phone to spy on him. After all, with everything happening in the office, Alice wonders if there's something going on, but no real answer seems to come to her. Although it is notable that Alice, for all her joking, jovial nature, she has a lot of the air is kind of sort of taken out of her. And it seems like things are moving just too fast for her to really comprehend what's going on, and something seems to be bugging her. Now, is it in regards to her brother Luke and his band, or whatever it is that she needs to pay for in hopes of getting something back? She doesn't elaborate. All we know at this point is that payday, at the very least, has already passed. Maybe that's why she's a little out of it. She had to already put money towards whatever it is that she needs to put money towards for the sake of her and / or her brother. But nothing comes of it, and I don't suspect that we will be hearing anything of it for a long time. It seems relatively low on priority and will probably be maybe a heart-wrenching reveal once things come to a head. Maybe after Luke has made an appearance, maybe before. I fully expect Luke to make an appearance, but he's not happening here. Anyways, Gwen asks where Sam and Celia are, and it turns out they finished their workload already and have in fact headed out for the morning. It seems that you could look at it and think that Sam and Celia are, after a week, 16 days? What was it? Yeah, no, wait, hang on. Yeah, 16 days of knowing each other, they've decided to give each other a shot, right? Maybe. Nah, that's not what happens. If you recall last time, Sam got an email from John, right? No full name, just John, from an internal email inside the OIAR, and that led him to, well, the email included a name and an address. And presumably, that is where he ends up going, because in the next scene, Celia and Sam are at someone else's flat, apartment, house. Hard to say. All we know is that apparently in this little house, this little abode, lives a man by the name of Jerry. Jerry. Likely Gerard Key, if you will. Now, Jerry is a hospitable host, very bubbly, very friendly, apparently an artist, and he reveals that he actually shares his home with Gigi, his grandmother, apparently officially named Gertrude, although this is stuff that I've gotten from external resources, but apparently Gigi's name is, in fact, Gertrude. Curious, isn't it? Jerry, apparently, like I said, is an artist, and Celia takes interest in one of the paintings that he has made, which Jerry decides to gift to her. Very friendly, this Jerry. Have to say, very bubbly personality. It's at this point that Sam reveals that he's there to ask them about the Magnus Institute. And a beat passes with no one saying anything. Jerry, despite his bubbly personality, goes quiet, and Gigi, who is a bit cold, a bit terse, not rude, but certainly gives off the air of not having the personality of politeness, but the wherewithal to be polite. Doesn't say anything either. Everyone seems to get a little tense at that point. Sam reveals that he was apparently on one of their gifted kids programs, and that he got a list of other kids, apparently wanting to meet the others and swap stories, or at least that's the story that he gives Jerry and Gigi. However, Gigi pipes in and says that Jerry can't help, with Jerry casually saying that he doesn't remember any of it. There's a noise from Gigi about him saying as much, but Sam catches on to it and notes that, oh, so he was a candidate. Now, Jerry says he was really young, just remembers filling forms and questionnaires and getting asked questions about what books he read, role models, etc. before being sent away. Sam says he is disappointed. Well, he doesn't say he's disappointed, but you can hear it in the way that he talks. And Gigi eventually says that, hey, it looks like we need to get on with our day. Good luck with your hunt elsewhere. And then Sam and Celia leave, but not before Jerry gifts Celia the painting. And they take off. And just through the other side of the door, you can hear Jerry say that he liked them, with Gigi snarkily responding that, of course, Jerry likes them. Sam laments that they had just found themselves at another dead end, but Celia is satisfied with the painting at least. Sam thanks Celia for helping him, saying it was Celia's idea. Or rather, someone attributes the fact that looking into this was Celia's idea. And he laments how Alice wants him to drop the case, but he's too dang curious to do so. But since he's at a dead end, he realizes there's not much else that he can really do. So instead, Celia asks him to help her with her mystery. Apparently, she's looking into physics cases, incidents that involve time travel, other dimensions, and teleportation. Things such as that. And apparently, since the search bar doesn't work in their office, in the system, she would like Sam to keep an eye out for such cases, since that's the only thing that she can really do, and there's only so much one person can do in a single night. Now, Sam notes that it's a little more sci-fi than what they usually do, but he agrees, asks Celia if she's doing it for the podcast she was on, which Celia says she is doing a favor for someone named Georgie. At which point, the episode ends. Well then, like I said, episode 8 is a bit of a wild one. First of all, as I mentioned before, setting aside the incident and how it seems to feed a little more into the idea that there is, a pattern of behavior with regards to which voices dictate which incidents. And setting aside what's going on between the fact that Gwen doesn't know what, her job entails, we're bound to find out sooner or later. Let's just laser in on the fact that we have met this universe's Jerry and Gertrude. Jerry and Gertrude. Oh! So, for those of you who don't know, Jerry, voiced by John Gracie, is the same voice of Jerry, aka Gerard Key, from Magnus Archives. Of course, in Archives, Jerry is dead, and has a much more different outlook on life. Having served, I guess, the Institute as a sort of extra pair of hands to help Gertrude Robinson with her disruption activities and business trips. Jerry would later go on to die of what I believe was a tumor that had grown in his head. Whether that has anything to do with his activities or if it was just something that happened without anyone really noticing, it's never really explained. But Jerry is long dead by the events of Magnus Archives taking place, at least from the point of view of the audience. Though he does get a appearance in a couple of statements, even being voiced by John Gracie, in I believe 1 or 2 episodes, possibly 3, via some spooky magic nonsense. Whereas in that world, he was a cynical, spiteful, but a bleak, none too optimistic individual with certain perspectives that do not lend themselves towards hope and optimism. Here, A, he's alive. B, he seems to be much more well-adjusted, I guess, to the workings of the world, He doesn't seem to be out in the world disrupting rituals or haphazardly rescuing individuals from entities like Jerry did in when we mentioned earlier the Reflections, Lost in a Crowd, evidence supporting the lonely being present in this case. Instead, he's just a fun dude, an artist. Apparently he's living with his grandmother, although it should be noted that in Archives, Jerry is not the grandson of Gertrude. Rather, he is the grandson of one of Gertrude's least favorite people in the world, Mary Key. Might be scary. The odds of Jerry in this instance being that well-adjusted are not high. After all, it seems that John led Sam to Jerry, and Jerry was apparently involved with the Gifted Kids program at the Magnus Institute, which we are now getting introduced to here as being one of the reasons that Sam is interested in what could possibly have happened to the Institute. It explains a lot. We could maybe hand wave it, right, as it being a front for whatever actual ulterior motive that he has, but it seems to check out. Jerry admits that he was part of the program, whether he did it. Yeah, he probably did by accident, honestly, considering how Gigi got incredibly pissed off at him about it. Or quietly pissed off, I should say. So odds are, dude's probably got some sort of spooky skeletons in his closet still. He's just doing a better job of hiding it. Or he just hasn't had to worry about it ever since. Or for all we know, he still has to worry about it, and we just have yet to see the consequences of that playing out. He is with Gertrude. And Gertrude, in this world, again, she's alive. Which we can assume it to be a good thing, but the question is, what is she doing here? And what has she been doing for the past couple of decades? Of course, the timeline is a little different. At this point in time, Gertrude is, well, alive and well in the year of our Lord 2024, whereas in archives, she was supposed to have died in 2015, 2016, which would be the time when she attempted to burn down the Institute. Of course, the timeline is different. By this point, the Institute has been burned down for well over 20 years. Meaning that either she is responsible for it and she got away with it scot-free, or maybe she has nothing to do with it. Fat chance of that, though, considering she gets weirdly quiet and doesn't react, at least immediately or with any real, the beat that it takes when Sam brings up the Institute seems to suggest that they didn't think they were going to hear that name ever again. And I guess the question is, why did you think you would never have to hear about the Magnus Institute ever again? Gigi? Unless you are responsible in some way, shape, or form for its destruction. Now, you could very well just be a old lady just trying to live out the rest of her days in peace alongside her maybe grandson, maybe adoptive grandson. We don't know just yet, although it's likely to be the case, considering if Gertrude is here and Jerry is here, surely Mary has to factor into this in some way, but we don't know why. It would be interesting if Mary ended up being the one who worked at the Institute, but there's nothing to give us any indication of that. Maybe Gertrude was the archivist at the Institute yet again, but for some reason or another is no longer finding employment. Maybe because she set it on fire herself. We don't know, but we know that she's here, we know that she's alive, and we know that John sent Sam here for a reason, even if that reason ends up being them shutting up and not giving any inch. Well, Gertrude not giving any inch. Jerry might have done it by accident. Now, whether this serves some grand purpose in the design of the web or is an attempt to do external research by John or whoever is spying in on them remains to be seen. It seems a bit of an odd choice considering nothing really comes out of it, and instead we as the audience are sat here wondering what the heck is going on and why are they here and what could they possibly be doing and how are they involved in this government conspiracy, because what else would you call it at this point? In any case, we know they're alive. We know that they were at the Institute at least once in the entirety of at least Jerry's life. We know that they know about the Institute, and we know that they don't exactly have, well, we can assume that they don't have a positive perspective regarding the Institute, and it seems to them that the mere mention of it is like dragging a ghost or skeleton out of the closet for them. We can expect, obviously, this is just a statement of the obvious, but we can expect to see them again. Whether or not seeing them again will be a boon for Sam, or whether they'll be an obstacle for Sam, a much more explicit obstacle working against Sam rather than standing as a wall of information and feigned ignorance, we'll just have to see. But it would be very interesting if we were to look at Gertrude here and Jerry here and be confronted with the possibility that they are our antagonists in one way, shape, or form. At the very least, we know that there are multiple factions at play here, and not just the different followers and avatars of the different entities. Instead, we have the OIAR, we have whoever is spying on the OIAR, and we have whoever is trying to keep whatever happened at the Institute a secret. And unfortunately, in that faction, we have Jerry and Gertrude. I certainly hope that they'll be on our side when all things are said and done. Because if there's one thing I recall about Gertrude, it's that she has a very matter-of-fact, professional, cutthroat, merciless modus operandi. And if there's even a hint that Sam could present a threat to whatever it is, if indeed she is protecting something and preventing something, then she could very well turn out to be a very dangerous enemy. At least from the perspective of our protagonists. Speaking of returning characters, Celia, straight up, well, first of all, it's interesting, right? That she should be looking into specific cases. We knew that she was looking for something. We didn't know what, but now we know exactly what she's looking for. And she's looking for things regarding time displacement, teleportation, and what else was it? What else did she mention? It was other dimensions. Funny, you should be on the lookout for anything regarding alternate dimensions. It seems more and more apparent that Celia is a tourist from another world. Just straight up isekai'd into another world for reasons noble, maybe, perhaps. And then she just name drops Georgie. Now, for those who don't know, oh my gods, Georgie is a character from Archives, being a amicable ex of John, who also manages to survive the apocalypse, the change, and goes on to be a figure of liberation for those trapped within the domains, factoring in quite heavily into the plan to eject them from that reality. Celia and Georgie were acquaintances at that point in time. By that point in time, Celia would go on to consider herself a follower of sorts of Georgie, as well as Melanie, among others who were plucked out of their domains post-change. Now, while Celia does not make an appearance at the end, at the final episode, here we have her. Here we have a Celia mentioning a Georgie, while the Celia in this particular instance is searching out an interestingly narrow topic for incidents. Things that could reasonably be connected to the gap in reality. As I've mentioned before, the gap in reality has been connected to several cases, and one such case did see a person going into the gap at Hilltop Road at a specific date and then emerging at a date earlier than when they went inside to find a world that was completely different from what they knew, including the existence of the Institute. And yet here is Celia looking for something resembling that. And unfortunately for Celia, nothing like that has appeared. Well, it has appeared this instance where someone went up to the tower and found that it was suddenly not surrounded by the countryside, but instead a gaping, yawning black void. But it's not quite the same now, is it? There isn't a change of scenery. There isn't buildings being shifted from one location to another. But that's what Celia, we can presume, is on the lookout for. It's almost as if she's looking for the gap in reality as well. And then there's Georgie. Is this the same Georgie that we know? As we've noticed here in this space, there are some repeat elements. While history isn't exactly repeating itself in this reality, it's certainly rhymed. And the rhymes that we've been getting are the Magnus Institute being very obviously a location of super secret, scary, horrific nonsense. We have Jerry, we have Gertrude, we have the name Magnus, we have the Bouchards, and we have, of course, the entities, but less of a rhyme and more of an illusion at this point now, isn't it? Or just straight up canonization, but that's besides the point. So with all of these parallel elements, these repeating elements and echoes of what could have been, is this the Georgie we know, or is it a different Georgie? Because why? Why would our suspicious Celia be working and doing a favor for a Georgie that they don't know? And why would Georgie be looking for this kind of stuff? Or is that a lie? Is it possible that Celia is lying and she's not doing a favor for this world's Georgie, but a different Georgie, specifically the one from her universe? But then again, why? And I think I have a guess. If we were to assume that this Celia is the same Celia from Archives, and that this Georgie is the same Georgie from Archives, then logically that means that they had to get here. And that means that they had to go through the gap in reality. Is that something you can just do? Well, I mean, we don't know. However, when the web broke open the gap, and when the web made it a proper escape for them from reality to the alternate universes, they never really talked about closing it, did they? No one, as I recall, ever seems to mention the gap ever closing. They talk about the avatars being depowered. They talk about Martin and John being missing, whereas all the other avatars were just returned to normal. But no one ever talks about whether the gap ever closed. So it is possible that while Georgie does appear at the end of the series, that she made the active decision to jump into the gap, or maybe she did so purely by accident. Who's to say? But why would she? Why would she even be in the area when by that point in time, all of them know that Hilltop Road is dangerous? Unless they figured out that the gap was in fact still open post-change. Why would they jump through? The best reason that I could come up with is that It's an active decision, a deliberate decision that the group, maybe the whole group of survivors, maybe just Georgie and Celia, made because of guilt, really. For Georgie in particular, one of the biggest regrets that she had as the final season wore on was that she didn't do enough. That she saw what was happening to John, saw how it was affecting him, and wondered if maybe she had done something, maybe things could have turned out differently. It could be guilt, and this could be a means of her, maybe the others, making up for the fact that they have just passed their apocalypse on to someone else. They just sort of assumed that there would be another group of intrepid or motley band of misfits to step up to the plate and clean up and pass the apocalypse on, or maybe eliminate the entities altogether. But there was never really the guarantee that that would happen. And they didn't know exactly what would happen. They were confident, right, that the entities would be ejected. They didn't have any real reason to really assume that that was a lie on the part of the web. And John would go on to confirm that whatever was at the gap was legit and unknowable and unseeable. So they didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know if they were going to be passing along their apocalypse to one or a multitude of universes all at once. Nor did they know whether they were the origin point or if they were just another chain in a long line of passing it on. So compiling the guilt, the unknown aspect, and the potential to do so and follow through on doing, I guess, the right thing, and the aspect of choice being a very important theme in the series as a whole, it kind of tracks that Georgie, riddled with guilt, would feel compelled to at least try to help the other universes, even if it's only through subtle means such as working for a government institution to do so. It's not something we can see, unfortunately. It's an interesting hypothesis, and if the prediction ends up being true, it would be pretty, well, it'd be an interesting development, to say the least. And a very good exploration into Georgie's character as well. But so long as we don't hear her voice, we can't make that assumption. It would be a little bit bizarre for all this to just be a red herring. Now, I don't think it would be wrong for it to be a red herring. It wouldn't be wrong to get us to focus on, oh, here's Jerry, here's Gertrude, here's Georgie, and then Celia. What's with all these pieces? John is clearly involved. Like, there's all this stuff, but there's also the possibility that maybe we're just barking up the wrong tree. Maybe Georgie here is not the same Georgie. Maybe Celia is just so happens to be asking the right questions at the right time for all of us to just be ever so slightly skeptical and suspicious and on edge, trying to piece together what could possibly happening, especially when considering the fact that multiverses are canon and known to exist. I just don't think that's what's gonna happen, though. I don't expect that to be the case. I think both writer and reader alike, no matter how much you could enjoy creating the shock of a plot twist such as that, just, creating a plot twist of just like, oh yeah, no, this was the big thing. Usually when you want a plot twist, you want it to be something important. You don't want it to take something and lower it in importance instead and just be like, no. You have to offer something of equal value to make up for all the excitement that was into one given specific detail that you've been including up to that point. And I feel like writer would not be satisfied with just being like, oh, it's just a coincidence. Just as much as a reader or listener would be disappointed by such a revelation. But again, as with everything, only time will tell. And that's that for all the parallel elements. I guess we're going to see more about Gwen's job, maybe in the next episode, in the coming episodes. I forget when exactly it finally starts to get a follow-up with her role as externals liaison. Regarding Sam, I don't know. I mean, it raises questions. The Institute was an academic, establishment. Even in archives, it was regarded as an academic establishment dedicated to the research of paranormal and supernatural activities. They prefer supernatural, I think, wasn't it? Hardly matters. The point is, it was an academic institute. So I guess it would make sense that they would have a gifted children's program, or at least they would have that kind of front. Nothing of the like was mentioned in archives, but here we have it, and hints of an existence, but that just raises a very, very important and alarming question. What the heck was the Magnus Institute doing, and why were they looking for children specifically? One can't help but wonder if they were looking for another John, right? I can't help but wonder, with all that's been happening, it feels like rather than taking the subtle steps to recreate the events of archives, it seems like there is a concentrated effort by at least two entities, multiple factions without a doubt, but a concentrated effort by multiple factions to recreate the events of archives in the universe of Protocol. Now, it seems like with the attempt to bust open the gap my suspicion, of course, assuming it's correct, is that they tried to bust open the gap at Hilltop Center. And my suspicion about a gifted children's program is to find another John, in order to create the necessary pieces to bring about the change again, as well as the escape. It's almost as if they're trying to save the universe, the heartache that comes with having the entities, and just instead keep the chain moving and ensure that no one isn't holding it. It's like the world's, or rather the universe's, worst iteration of hot potato, where you don't want to be holding the entities for too long, and you should whoever is out there is trying to pass it along as quickly as possible. But again, that's just a theory. For now, though, we're gonna go ahead and call it for now. At this point of time, as of recording, as of streaming, there's just 2 more episodes left. However, for patrons of Rusty Quill, the new episode should be releasing in a couple of hours or a day. It's Japan time for me, so it's a couple of hours from this point on. But the next episode the hiatus should be ending, and they will be airing the episode for patrons. I believe in like 9 hours. I believe it's 9 p.m. UK time. So if you're already caught up, by all means, go ahead and give that a listen, and go ahead and support Rusty Quill for the phenomenal work that they put into this series. It is amazing, and you know me, I already love it. For those of us who are not patrons and are unable to shell out, there's no worries. The next episode will be coming out, I believe, this week, Thursday, same time. So be on the lookout for that. But of course, we're only on episode 8 here. I'm going to continue going through with episode 9 analysis and episode 10 analysis. For me, that'll be on Thursday and Saturday, respectively. So be on the lookout for that. But if you have any comments, theories, hypotheses, or predictions that you would like to share with regards to episode 8 from here on onward, of course, naturally, please, those of you who are watching the VODs or listening to it, by all means, leave those theories in the comments. Leave a like, leave a subscribe, and hey, thank you so much for popping in, hanging out, being your beautiful selves. I deeply appreciate it. I hope you're having a good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever the time is in your neck of the woods. And with that being said, shop's closed. Get out. Bye-bye.